All right, because we're going to look at lesson 9. Our opening number talk here is what percentage. See if you can calculate these percentages mentally, meaning without a calculator. I'm going to show you how to do this in a second, but let's see if we can figure this out. Question is 10 is what percent of 50? Well, I mentioned yesterday we could find 1% or 10% of 50, right? 50, 10% of 50 would be moving that decimal over one place. So 10% of 50 would be 5. So what percent of 50 would be 10? We just found 5 is what percent of 50? Well, that's 10% of 50. How about 1 is what percent of 50? Could you do 17 is what percent of 50? So based off those other percentages. Here's how I think of these. 10 is what percent of 50? Again, I find 10% of 50 and I base everything off of that, or off of 1%. 10% of 50 is 5. 1% of 50 would be 0.5. And if I know those things, I can find anything else. 10 is what percent of 50? Well, let's see, that would be 5 times 2 would be 20%. 5 is what percent of 50? Already found it. It's 10% of 50. 1 is what percent of 50? Well, let's see, 10% was 5. 10% was 5. To go from 5 to 1, I divide by 5. So to go from 10% to whatever that percent is, I do the same thing. I'm going to divide by 5, and I get 2. 1 is 2% of 50. 17 is what percent of 50? Well, let's see. 17 is what percent of 50? I just found 1 to be 2% of 50. To go from 1 to 17, I would multiply by 17. So I'm going to take that 2% and multiply it by 17 and get 34%. So the question here is, how do we calculate the percent of something? Now this, the lesson here is on finding percents that are bigger and smaller than 1%. We're going to look at that, but I just want to kind of get a global way of finding percentages. So the questions here on the bottom of the page, might be the top of the page for you, is about this waiter working his shift, and during his shift he delivered 13 appetizers, 17 entrees, and 10 desserts. And the question is, what percent of the dishes he delivered were desserts, appetizers, and entrees? So this is actually an important thing to know how to do, and companies might want to keep track of these things. What are we selling most of? What percent are we selling the most of? Well, here's the thing with percents. Here's what we need to know. We need to know how many total things did he deliver to his tables. Well, he delivered 13 appetizers, 17 entrees, and 10 desserts, for a total of 40 items, 40 things altogether. So I added the 13, the 17, and the 10. That's our whole. So now the question is, what percent of what he delivered were we should actually say, was desserts? Well, desserts was 10 out of that 40. Now we can do this through some long division. 40 goes into 10. You could also simplify first. 4 fits into 1. That's the same thing. The other option for us is what I mentioned before, is that idea of cross-multiplying. So part over whole, our part over our whole, our 10 over our 40, equals, the percent is what we don't know, over 100. Always 100 on the bottom beneath the percent. Now we would cross-multiply. 100 times 10 is 1,000, equals 40 times that question mark, we don't know what that is, and then divide by 40 to get our answer. And that would be 25%. For the appetizers, same idea, except now we have 13. 13 over 40 equals some number over 100. Or, if you prefer, and you could use your calculator here too, 14 goes into 30, 40 goes into 100, 40 goes into 13, or divide. Remember, if you're doing your calculator, that's 13 divided by 40. When you divide it out, you're going to get a decimal. So if I did the long division for A, I would get 0.25. That's the decimal. Move the decimal over 2 places to get the percent. This idea of the proportion, for the next one, 17 over 40 equals question mark over percent, removes that idea of having to move the decimal at all. I would get 17 times 100, the 1700 equals 40 times question mark, and divide that by 40, divide by 40. So we get decimals here, and the idea with this lesson is it's okay to have part of a whole number as your percent. It could be 0.7231897. I don't know. It's okay that we get a decimal. They're not always like 20% or 8%. A percent is a part to whole comparison. So one way to calculate a percent is to make a fraction. We put the part on the top and the whole on the bottom, and then we just change that fraction to a decimal, and then we can change it to a percent. Another way is to make one of these proportions. Remember I talked about cross multiplying? We can say part over whole is the same as percent over 100 and do a cross multiply problem. There's lots of different ways to do this. I'm going to show you this part to whole comparison with division. What we need to know, though, is we need to know what the whole is. So as we talk about this waiter who's waiting, we won't spend too much time on this, but the question is here is find each percent of 60. What do you notice about your answers? 30% of 60. Well, again, we could find 10% of 60. 10% of 60 would be, move that decimal once, would be 6. 20% would be double that, would be 12. 30% we would multiply by 3 to get 18. So 30% of 60 would be 18. Now we want to ask, similar question, what's 3% of 60? Well, let's see. 10% of 60 would be 6. I'm looking for a smaller amount. 1% would be 0.6. Now if I multiply by 3, I get 1.8. So our numbers should make sense in context. 60 is not huge. 18, 30% of it, yeah, that makes sense. 3% is smaller than that 30%. It's related. How about 0.3%? Well, we can get less than 1%, right? Again, 10% would be 6. 1% would be 0.6. 0.1% would be 0.06. And then I could multiply that by 3 to get my 3%, and so on. So finish this one up. And then let's look at this next question. 20% of 50,000 is 20% of 5,000 is 1,000. 21% of 5,000 is 1,050. Find each percentage of 5,000. Be prepared to explain your reasoning. So they've done this with a double number line. It says if you get stuck, you can use that. I'm going to just go with the 10%, 1% idea. So let's see. 1% of 5,000. Here's my 5,000. 10% of 5,000 is 500. 1% of 5,000 is 50, if I move that decimal one more place. 0.1% would be 5. 0.01% would be 0.5. So I can use those ideas to calculate all of my other numbers. 1% of 5,000, I already have that in my chart here, that's 50. 0.1% also have that one. Again, it's just moving the decimal one more place. 20.1%. Well, they told me 20% of 5,000 is 1,000. So 1,000 plus that 0.1% would be 1,005. 20.4%. Well, let's see. If 0.1% is 5, to get to 0.4%, I would multiply by 4. 5 times 4 would be 20. So 20% would be that 1,000 plus that 20 value, or 1,020. Okay, so we can add these things together, we can multiply them, we can do all kinds of things with percentages. Try question 3, and then we're going to jump ahead to lesson, 9.4. Talking about population growth. Population of a city was approximately 243,000 people, and it increased by 8%. What is the new population? So 243,000 increased by 8%. Well, how can I get that 8%? Can I find 10%? Can I find 1%? If I can find 1%, I can find 8%. And again, this is just moving decimals, right? So 10% would be 24300. 1%, move that decimal one more place, 2430. So to get 8%, I would multiply that by 8. I'm going to use my calculator this time. Now, when I multiply here, I get 19,440. It's not my final answer here, though, right? That's how much the population increased by. But what I want to do is add that on to the original amount of my 243,000. I get a total of 262,440 people. Can you do that to this town? Now, this is maybe a city. It's increasing not by 8%, but by 0.8%. Give that one a try. And from there, let's read through the lesson summary. A couple pages there. Our big takeaways from this lesson is, I want you to remember that how to find a percent. We have that part to whole comparison. Make that fraction, turn it into a decimal, move the decimal a couple places, or use that equation to cross multiply. And also the way we find any percent, percent of a number, if we can find 10% or 1% or 0.1%, we can find any percent at all by adding those percentages together.